We'll go through all of that for you, but I wanted to do this right now because it is the 40th anniversary this year of Live Aid, that big concert that was held on either side of the world. It was held in the United States, was held in London. They had this extraordinary array of performers, and when you think of Live Aid, the few things you think of Bob Geldof, who organised the whole thing. That's been essentially him for decades. You think of Queen and the performance by Queen and so many others at Live Aid, but it was raising money for famine in Ethiopia at the time. And the question is, all these years later, has much changed? And Ian Horner, who's a veteran entertainment reporter, he's been writing about these things and talking about them. He does podcasts now, and he interviews some very famous people. So we'll be talking to Ian periodically on our Friday night show. But I spoke with him earlier in the week because he interviewed Bob Geldof when he was out here earlier in the year just about all of this and the success of Live Aid, but the idea of trying to raise money for famine in Africa, whether we've got anywhere with all of this, what happened, what was the pivotal point that started the money rolling in? Did the money actually achieve anything? As I say, he's got some critical things to say of Donald Trump as well, so I'll mention that. But here is that conversation with Ian, who spoke with Bob Geldof and remembered that event that happened over 40 years ago.
G'day, how are you, John?
Yeah, we all remember it. We remember it for the music, but then it was an attempt to deal with famine in Africa, and how much money they raised, what impact it made, is something that perhaps is forgotten in the wash.
Look, it was just massive. At the time, it was the biggest telethon in world history, 1.9 billion viewers. That's still a record. And talk about talent, you're right about the music. Bowie, Queen, Mark Knopfler, Paul McCartney, Phil Collins, Roger Daltrey, even Cher turned up for the finale, We Are the World. Yeah, but Bob Geldof was the brains behind it. He was at that stage mainly known as the lead singer in Boomtown Rats.
Yep.
And he was able to convince all these big names to play and play for free.
Yeah.
And that's right, we remember Queen. And that was the biggest convincing that he had to do, because Queen at that point considered themselves on the slide downwards, if you can believe that.
And we saw it in the movie. It was dramatised beautifully, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah. So he put it together and he said, look, if you can put all your hooks in one montage and go and hit the world with it, that's going to do your careers really, really good. So true enough, we all remember Freddie leading the Wembley crowd in a repeat echo chorus of Day-O. It was just mind-blowing. But as powerful as that wasn't the magic moment of the whole event. That was something altogether different. And if I just backtrack for a second, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, had sent a crew to Ethiopia to bring back footage of the famine. Now, this was handed over to an editor to cut into a succinct video montage. But when the editor was looking at the vision, he realised much of it was so graphic, so disturbing, that it could never be broadcast. So what he did was splice out all the graphic stuff, put it into a reel of offcuts, and while he was working, he was listening to a pop song of the time, Who's Gonna Drive Me Home, by the Cars.
Yeah.
And he just cut the reel of offcuts to that. Meantime, Geldof was working on the Live Aid rundown and discussing with Bowie when he was going to do his turn on stage. And Bowie turns to Geldof and he says, I'm not going to do 3 songs, I'm going to do 2. And in place of the last track, we're going to broadcast this video of famine offcuts. Let's go to Geldof to get the rest of the story. He was here in Sydney earlier this year for an evening with Bob Geldof, and I got to interview him for that. We discussed Live Aid, and I said to Sir Bob, most people are under the impression that the high point of Live Aid was Queen at Wembley Stadium, Freddie Mercury doing Day-O with the crowd. But that wasn't when people around the world began donating in droves, was it? That wasn't the magic moment.
If you ever go back and look at the concert, there's only one real moment, very specific, where Bowie introduces a very short clip of what's happening in Ethiopia. Bowie just says, have a look at this.
I'd like to introduce a video made by CBC Television. The subject speaks for itself. Thank you. Good night. Please send your money in.
And the song playing behind him was the Cars, Who's Going to Drive You Home Tonight?
Who's going to drive you home tonight?
Watched that again this morning, and it still brought me to tears all these years later.
Incredibly powerful. It took on a poignancy that had been kind of missing in the joy of the day. And you can see the faces crumble, almost ashamed that they're so young and pretty and healthy in this beautiful day. At that point, the phone lines collapsed around the world. So, and the power of that is the fact that you have this song about teenage breakup. And the genius of the editor was, well, the story of that is that it was CBC Canada couldn't show a lot of the footage they'd shot because it was so prurient. It was, as I say, call it the pornography of poverty. They were editing the bits they couldn't use on the broadcast and just splicing them together. And the guy who was doing it, the cameraman, was listening on his Walkman, the whiz-bang technology at the time, and he just was listening to the Cars. And without thinking about it, like you're running to, if you've got your ears in, you're running to that beat, he was cutting the beat of that song. And then suddenly he was listening to what the words were saying. Who's going to pick you up when you fall down?
Who's gonna pick you up when you fall?
And he just spliced together this child dying for collapsing, and he understood what he'd done, and they got it to me, and I showed it to Bowie, and we were talking about, he wanted to know what I wanted him to do. And I showed him this, and he started crying, and he said, I'm going to introduce this, and I said, well, don't, because none of the world broadcast will take it off the air. And he said, I don't care, I'm going to introduce this film. This is why I'm doing the show. So you don't argue with a great artist like Bowie, and of course his instincts were 100% correct, as ever.
Can't go on thinking nothing's wrong. Who's gonna drive you home tonight? Who's gonna pick you up when you fall?
Yeah, so there's Bob Geldof, and Ian, we, as preparing for all of this, have gone and looked at that Canadian Broadcasting image with the song and the images. It's heartbreaking. You can understand why.
I can't get through it without crying. It's just amazing. And you can see it on YouTube. It's there to watch anytime you like. And it takes a lot of guts to get through to the end of it. But the most tragic irony of all, in this 40th year since Live Aid, is that we haven't gone forwards in our fight to end world hunger at all. We've gone backwards. And it was here in our interview that Geldof really got angry. He was passionate but controlled, well practiced at it, I think.
Yeah, can I just intervene there if I can? Because I do often play trigger warnings on our show, because he's teed off on Donald Trump. This is about the cutbacks, huge cutbacks to the aid program around the world, which was implemented earlier this year. It was very, very controversial, and people were giving examples of what the US aid program was doing, and not fulfilling its actual purpose. But in cutting it back, they cut back on massive aid programs to some of the poorest parts of the world. So you listen to this and you look at what's happening in the United States today, and a lot of our listeners will hear no ill of Donald Trump. That's why I'm giving you the warning, because he's teed off on Donald Trump in the most extraordinary way, hasn't he?
That's right. Look, I said to Sir Bob, 2 decades on from Live Aid, why are people still starving when we actually have enough food to go around?
Food is a weapon that we use all the time, and you can see it where Musk and Trump and Vance have removed the food from the most vulnerable children's lives.
How did we get to the position where the greatest nation on earth is cancelling aid programs around the world from the position that we were in a few years ago, where countries' debt was being cancelled as a result of your efforts?
Well, we know how we got there because the majority of Americans voted in a fool, and it turns out to be probably a sociopath. They're behaving like aberrant children. They're almost hysterical in their glee at destroying what they possibly can. Any alliances they've ever had, any friendships they've ever had, any business relationships between countries or individuals. And it's a sort of thuggery. It's a politics of thuggery. It is a protection racket. They threaten New Zealand. They threaten Australia with tariffs. And in Trump's case, we are only interested in ourselves and to hell with everyone else. And that found its purest expression when they cut their USAID budget, which is a fraction of the American fiscal year. And they did it because they asked people what percentage of the American GDP went towards aid, and the majority said 25%. In fact, it's 0.1. The most powerful man on the planet and the richest person in the world combined together to quite literally take whatever food there is from the hungriest children, the most vulnerable people, panicking because they only have a month's medicines left, and then presumably they die. But that's academic to those creeps in the White House.
Yeah, and if he's talking like that, you can't imagine he'd even be able to get into the place the way the United States is at the moment. And I'm sure there are people going to say, well, some of the problems in those countries are from their governments and corruption and civil war. But the people, there are kids now. How many generations down from the ones that were being seen in Live Aid? Well, they got nothing to do with all of that. They're just being left to die because the assistance they were getting is no longer there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Depressing way to end a Friday night, but it is worth revisiting it, isn't it? Because we're 40 years on, and we just haven't made any progress.
That's right, yeah. And look, this bit of vision that Bowie insisted on being played, even though he thought that it wouldn't go to air. It's one of the most powerful pieces of movie making that I've ever seen, and I can't stress enough how it's always good to watch it, and it brings you back to earth, and it recontextualizes the news, and you suddenly realise what's important. There was actually another clip on YouTube where Billy Connolly and Pamela Stephenson are being interviewed about the entertainment industry's support for Live Aid, and they run the Ethiopian footage with the cars singing, and they come back to Billy, and the interviewer has to take over because Connolly is sitting there helplessly sobbing.
Yeah. Because we think of Live Aid and we go back and have a look, and if someone said to me, "Oh, Live Aid," I'll go back and look at the Queen, the clips of Queen, because now we know what the background of the whole thing is. It's a wonderful piece of television. Maybe that's the one we should be looking at, the video with the soundtrack there from the cars. Ian, very interesting, but as you say. If you talk like that these days about Donald Trump, someone's going to be noting it, and you wonder whether your passport's going to get marked.
Yeah, there are a few things that are worth standing up for.
Yep. All right, mate. Thank you very much for that. We'll talk again very soon.
Mate. Look forward to it. Cheers, mate.
Yeah, see, that's Ian Horner speaking to Bob Geldof. I think the situation there with, because that's that USAID program, which they're reviewing there. A lot of those programs have been cut back, but then you look at aid programs around the world. Do they actually get to the people that are needed? Are they there for political reasons as opposed to helping the people that actually need it? And then the intractable problems seemingly in places like Africa. So, look, Ian Horner, what he does is does interviews. He's actually doing a podcast called The Gossip and the Critic with Craig Bennett. That's on YouTube, and there's interviews and news and reviews there, and longer material as well on YouTube. So that's a little sample. We'll try and get him on periodically with some of those interviews during our summer season, which will be here on Friday nights. 131873 is the number.